Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to a great conversation today between one of our own, Vice President Joe Biden, and former Secretary of Energy Ernie Moniz. This is the first event that is jointly organized by our Denham Institute, as well as the Biden Institute. And for those of you who don't know Denham, you should. It's the Delaware Environmental Institute, which is led by Don Sparks and involves many, many of our faculty and students here. So I know that everybody in those two groups worked very hard to organize this event. So let's just give a hand to everybody from the Biden Institute and Denham. And I'm sure we'll have many, many panels and discussions on this topic because clean and renewable energy is a topic that is very, very important. It's very dear to all of our hearts and my own in particular. Today's topic focuses on 21st century clean energy solutions. And it is clear that the world critically depends on those. For our sustainability of the earth and the environment, we absolutely need clean energy solutions. The challenge of developing clean and sustainable energy for the planet is connected to so many other challenges as well. It's tied to environmental conversation, healthy economy, good middle-class jobs, national security, and so much more. In fact, the search for clean energy solutions, as I said, was a primary area of my own research for many, many years. On one end, I dedicated my career as a professor and a leader of a research group to basically furthering the future of the internal combustion engine, making it more efficient, up to 25% more efficient, and up to 99% cleaner, so that we can give those guys who worked on renewable energy solutions a chance to develop them, because we absolutely need the horizon to develop the clean energy solutions. And on another end, I actually became an enthusiast of clean energy solutions as the director of the University of Michigan's Energy Institute. During that time, I had the very good fortune to connect with a professor from my alma mater, MIT, the director of the Energy Initiative there, Ernie Moniz, and learned a lot from Ernie, in particular how to bring together energy from a scientific perspective and engineering perspective with the social science perspective, the policy, and the business world. That's critically important, and you'll see that theme today. And in my subsequent career, I had the good fortune to continue to connect with Ernie. I remember when I was at Stony Brook, one of my responsibilities was to be the vice president for Brookhaven National Lab Affairs, and Ernie had moved up in the world, and at that time, he was the Secretary of Energy. So we continued to have conversations. In fact, we brought Ernie here at the University of Delaware about a year ago when we had the National Lab Day. And so we continue to have productive interactions, and I'm sure today will be very, very exciting. The University of Delaware has so much to offer in the energy and environmental space. Our strengths in chemical engineering and engineering at large, our strengths in science, in social science, in policy. I believe we have it all, and the world needs it all, because when it comes to energy, there's just no unique silver bullet. It's not an either-or proposition. We need this and this and this and this. That's how we march into a sustainable future. So I'm delighted that we're going to have a great conversation today. I can't wait for it, and I want to introduce the leader of Denham, Don Sparks, who will formally introduce the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President Asanas. As the director of the Delaware Environmental Institute, I'd like to add my welcome to this exciting event today, which represents our first joint endeavor with the Biden Institute in what we hope will be a fruitful and enduring partnership. When the Biden Institute was launched last year, we were quite happy to note that environmental sustainability was one of the domestic policy issues that was specifically mentioned in its mission statement. We were certainly eager to meet the staff and see where the interest of our institutes coincided and what projects we could take on together. I'd like to thank Kathy McLaughlin and her staff at the Biden Institute for their generosity with their time and talents in what for them must have been a whirlwind year. We are grateful for this opportunity to co-host a meaningful dialogue about clean energy, one of the key challenges of our time. Finding workable solutions to some of these grand challenges is what Denon is all about. More than 180 faculty in departments across the University of Delaware and at our partners, Delaware State University, Del Tech, and Wesley College, are affiliated with Denon and engaged in research and education in our core areas of biogeosciences, climate, food and water security, habitat and biodiversity, environmental monitoring, and human dimensions, which is our term for all the ways we study human interactions with the environment, from policy and economics to history, literature, art and design, ethics and justice. By providing a big umbrella under which scholars from many different disciplines can meet and interact, form interdisciplinary teams, and pursue funding, Denon strives to make the connections and provide the knowledge that supports sound environmental policies. By working together, and now with our new partners at the Biden Institute as well, we aim to bring socially acceptable, economically viable, and environmentally sustainable solutions to life. We are thrilled to have Ernest J. Moniz here with us today. He is the CEO of the Energy Futures Initiatives, a nonprofit organization he founded in 2017 that embraces this multidisciplinary approach to finding solutions that are effective, pragmatic, and acceptable to the broadest possible set of stakeholders. He is also co-chairman of the Board of Directors and CEO of the Nuclear Threat Initiative and the Cecil and Ida Green Professor of Physics and Engineering Systems Emeritus at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He served as the U.S. Secretary of Energy from 2013 to 2017. And of course, we are equally thrilled that Joe Biden is here to engage in this important conversation about energy. As a U.S. Senator from Delaware for 36 years, and then as the 47th Vice President of the United States, he has provided leadership on some of the nation's most important domestic and international challenges. In January 2017, President Barack Obama awarded him the Presidential Medal of Freedom with distinction, the highest civilian honor in the United States. He is the founding chair of UD's Biden Institute. Please join me in welcoming Secretary Moniz and Vice President Biden to Mitchell Hall.
That's all for you, Ernie. Well, folks, it's good to be back in Mitchell Hall and not having to perform. You know, I don't know what it is now, Mr. President, but back when I was a student here, this was E52. Yeah, it's a long story, but this is the drama. Anyway, I generate a lot of drama usually for the Dean of Students. But Mr. President, Eleni, hey, John, how are you? John Cochran, Chairman of the Board, my sister Valerie, and others here. When the President asked me, which is a great honor and privilege, whether I'd come back and be associated with my university, I was anxious to do it. And he asked at the time that would I be able to hopefully bring in multidisciplinary folks who I had been exposed to, foreign and domestic, around the country, to come and have a conversation. And I'm going to try to make this a conversation. And as I was standing there hearing your comments, Dr. Sanas, I remember, my sister may remember this, a conversation I had with my dad. I had just been elected to the Senate, and because of circumstances beyond our control, my mom and dad and my sister were helping me raise my children because I lost part of my family. And so I'd go over to dinner frequently at my mom's house. I commuted every day, and one day, Ernie, about 6 months in, my dad said, "Well, Champ, what's it like?" And I said, "Dad, you know, it's like going back to graduate school." I said, "You sit there in these hearings and these brilliant people come and testify." I said, "I've learned so damn much. It's like going to graduate school." And he looked at me and said, "Joey, it's a hell of a place to start to learn." But two people who continued my education were Ernie and Dr. John Holdren. I spent an awful lot of time with both of them, and Secretary Moniz, it's a great joy to have you here. He's not only a good friend, but he's a brilliant scientist. He's, as I said, he's associated with the second best land-grant university in America, MIT. I can't resist it, Ernie. I can't resist it. One of the things that, if I wouldn't be trespassing on his time too much, I'd ask him back, because this is the guy who did the Iran deal. This is the guy who did the Iran deal, not just for the United States, but for England, for France, for Germany, for China, for Russia. This is the guy. This is the guy that no one, not a joke. Not a joke. We'd be in this situation, and the president would be getting briefed on the status of the agreement. And I give you my word as a Biden, without exception, he'd end the conversation, whether he's talking to the Joint Chiefs, whether he's talking to the intelligence community. What does Ernie say? What does Ernie say? And this guy has, I wish we had time. We're not going to confuse it here, but maybe a little bit at the very end we can save a few minutes. But this is the guy who put together that agreement, mainly because from the Russians to the Chinese to our allies, everybody, number one, knew how brilliant he was. Number two, how informed on the specific subject matter he was. And number three, how honorable he was. So I've been doing this a long, long time in national security issues. I've never seen a time when our allies and those who are partners but not allies, like Russia and China, took so much time and took so much stock in determining whether or not this deal was verifiable, whether this deal made sense, whether this deal would do what it said it would do. So Ernie, we owe you big time. We owe you big time. Folks, look. I'm going to take about another 3 minutes. We're talking about the environment here. We could talk about 50 different aspects of the environment. One of the things I want to talk about was one of the things that Secretary Moniz came to me and the administration asked whether I'd pitch in and give a hand to. And that was when he decided that it was really important for us to take a really hard look at the security and the stability and the how secure our energy infrastructure is in America. One of the things most people don't have any idea is that, according to the reports that were published between 2003 and 2012, an estimated 679 widespread power outages due to severe weather cost the U.S. economy between $18 and $33 billion every single year. And it's going to get worse. It's not, and did get worse. They're the last statistics we have. And it's going to get worse. And so we have to know how woefully behind our energy infrastructure is. We know our infrastructure overall is behind. Our airports, our ports, our highways, et cetera. But it's amazing. What people don't realize, at least I didn't realize, maybe those of you in the discipline know, we have 2.6 million miles of oil and gas pipeline. Most of it made of cast iron. Most of it built at a time when, after World War II, when things started to boom, and a lot of it very susceptible to leakage, a lot of it not very secure. We have over 640,000 miles of electric transmission lines, now and continue to be subject to severe weather. We have 414 natural gas facilities susceptible to severe weather and rising seas. They're basically at sea level where they were built. We have 330 ports handling petroleum products that need significant repair. We have 140,000 miles of rail line handling petroleum and liquefied natural gas that's not either secure or in good shape. And so one example is, for example, the national gas pipelines are aging and leak prone, and they create a significant safety environment in terms of methane. The estimated cost to repair would be $270 billion. $270 billion. You know, we signed on to the Paris Climate Accord in large part because of the work this man did, even though the president decided to walk away. The rest of the world's not walking away, and American business is not walking away, governors are not walking away, and states are not walking away. And so there's a lot to talk about here, but I want to have a question and answer time here. That although things are changing when you have American business considering the cost of the cost of carbon and the decisions they're making down the road, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. Mobil is pricing this $60 a metric ton by 2030. Disney uses between $10 and $20 a metric ton. Google is priced at $30 a metric ton. The reason I bother to say this is not a bunch of greenies like me, and environmentalists who are up there just waving the flag. This is a big deal. It's a gigantic economic deal. It's a gigantic security deal. And it's subject to other concerns, including cybersecurity. So there's a whole lot of things that we want to talk about, but what I want to do is sit down and ask Ernie a few questions and let him tell you what's on his mind. And then we're going to, and not too long into this, open it up for questions from all of you in the audience. But we're really fortunate to have this guy here. Thank you. Ernie, what do you have to say for yourself?
It's great to be here with you. That's number one. As the Vice President mentioned, maybe we'll come back to this, that when we issued our major report on energy infrastructure in 2015, this is the guy who went with us to a control room in Philadelphia of the grid and released it. So we have long-standing joint interest, joint work in these areas. But if I make a few kind of opening remarks, Mr. Vice President, one is I want to emphasize what you said in a slightly different way. We are on the path to withdrawing from the Paris Agreement, but neither we nor the world is going back from the low-carbon future. You mentioned it. Within days of the President's statement, mayors, governors, and 1,400 business leaders came out and said, look, we're in. And I think the latter is maybe even the most significant of all, because these are people who make, big time, capital decisions, risk management choices that have 1-2 decades of horizon, not 1 or 2 years. And they're saying, look, I'm not going to waste my money on doing this back and forth in terms of carbon. We're going to a low carbon future. I would just note, you mentioned the pricing. The oil companies, many oil companies were using the so-called shadow price of carbon 10 years ago at $40. They have formed the Oil and Gas Climate Initiative, a big $1 billion fund for clean energy. And I will say that in March, I joined the board of the Southern Company, giant utility, mainly in the southeast. And the Southern Company there's a vision of it as being coal. People haven't caught up to what's happened in the last 10 years as a issue of business decision-making, risk management, and approval of state regulatory commissions in the southeast, a 38% reduction in CO2 emissions already, and an announcement within the last 2 weeks that the utility will go to low to no carbon by 2050. That's the real ground truth of what's happening. As long as we can stay with the innovation agenda to make this all happen as soon as it can. And by innovation, I want to emphasize that I mean technology innovation, business model innovation, often driven by the technology innovation, and policy innovation. And that's probably in the order of decreasing confidence. The technology innovation I feel really good about. We got hard work to do, some basic science to do, lots of system engineering to do, but we're going to do it. In places like Delaware, we'll certainly contribute to that. Business models, as we've already said, the business leaders, you give them the rules, I'll figure out a good business.
Well, I would have to spoke. Goldman Sachs had 500 CEOs, and they wanted me to, this is a year and a half, 2 years ago, the very end of our administration. They wanted to talk about, we have to do something about infrastructure. We have to do something about this. It's not, I started off here as a kid in Delaware and trying to stop the construction of another chemical plant along the Delaware and Chesapeake Canal. This was, and we were kind of weird. It was like, what are these crazy kids doing? And now you have American business and leading the business people around the world understanding they've got to do something.
Mm-hmm. And in particular, as the energy system changes to low carbon, it brings new opportunities, frankly, to the energy infrastructure, as well as, of course, reveal some of the glaring challenges.
Well, let me ask you a question about that. The problems you identified in the report of the Department of Energy that exist in the existing infrastructure, how does that work in tandem with the significant changes in the positive sense that are taking place? What can we just bypass the repair, the updating, the modernization of the infrastructure as it is now to go to a completely new system, or do we have to, talk about that balance?
I think it's a mix. So one case where we just simply have to accelerate the job of replacement is what you mentioned, the distribution gas pipes in the cities, which have environmental and safety issues there. In other cases, it's really a question of simultaneously fixing and adding, I would say. So a great example of that, and a critical one, is the smart grid. That is the integration of the electric grid with information technology. Not only will that increase reliability and resilience, we saw some of that in that control room in Philadelphia, if you remember. But at the same time, we integrate that information technology to open up entirely new services for consumers, et cetera. In particular, look, let's face it, as the home becomes much more the Internet of Things, the integration of a smart electricity system with that will both, again, add to reliability, provide new services, and it should also increase energy efficiency. And then there are brand new infrastructures that we really need to create in a certain sense. So, for example, fast charging for an enormous number of electric vehicles that are coming down the pike. And I was just yesterday in Utah, and it's very interesting. The governor there, Governor Herbert,
good guy,
together with
Republican, good guy.
Yeah. Gee, I didn't want to say that, but I
friend.
But 3 states got together, the governors, and said, okay, let's do a regional EV charging network, and then it was such a good idea, 5 other governors joined in. So this is like building it out, a whole new infrastructure that is aligned with clean energy. And I know, and if I go to the distant future, I don't know if this will come out, but in terms of a new kind of infrastructure that needs to be developed, it could very well be that to solve our economy-wide clean energy needs, we may need to go to an electricity and hydrogen-based system. The latter would be an enormous infrastructure challenge.
Explain that for a second. Talk about what the promise there is, if it was possible to do it.
The promise is that, first of all, we've certainly heard a lot about hydrogen and fuel cell for light-duty vehicles. But we think you got to look at it in a different way. Namely, that the other parts of the transportation sector and the industrial sector for going to low carbon, it's not going to get there by being electrified.
Right.
It needs another way of going there. Hydrogen could be that way of doing that. So I think the question of hydrogen will be, does it have an economy-wide footprint in terms of industry, electricity? For example, it could replace some of the natural gas infrastructure in electricity generation and transportation. Then we would need to build out, frankly, with current technology, a very expensive, difficult one. But that, when we did that and then managed to make both electricity and hydrogen from carbon-free sources, we would have basically achieved our economy-wide clean energy goals.
For the students out here, one of the things that to show you how much has changed, when Barack and I were elected, we sat in the 67th or 68th floor of an office building in Chicago and put together the administration. I had 4 people, Senator Kaufman from here and some others 4, and he had 4, and we did everything from come up with the cabinet we wanted, that he wanted, and the major initiatives that we needed. And one of the things that we came up with, the president came up with, was, with the help of Larry Summers and other economists, was that we needed a major stimulus program that became known as the Recovery Act. And it was almost $1 trillion. It was ended up 847 billion, something like that. And one of the things that the president and I had been, and we wanted to change governments, the utility of what we did, in addition to just spend money. And so we, for example, we decided on electronic medical record keeping. We were told how much that would save. We put 30 billion into that. It's a long story, but anyway. One of the things that we decided was, we were told that we could drastically change the efficiency of our electric grid if we were to make some changes. So we came up with $100 billion. And the image we both had, neither one of us being experts, we sit there and talk into the night, was to be able to take the map of the United States behind us, sit there and make an announcement and have the grid light up all the way across to show where all the electric wires and where wind was tied in and so on. Make a long story short, we thought it was a great idea till we found out it couldn't get done because of zoning laws. Found out, not a joke, found out that each individual state had we knew it, we just didn't think it through. That something that would be, all you folks who are professors out there, experts in this, you know how much money we could save, how much energy we could generate, you know what we could do in terms of new technology with wind being able to, and solar, but it turns out they're very practical things. Made it virtually impossible, and we had to walk away rather than tie up $100 billion in something that could take 8 years of our administration. We didn't know we'd have 8 at the time. So one of the things that the secretary was great at is looking out at what the opportunities were, but what were the practical problems? And what practical means are there around them? And the reason I raise that, Ernie, is to get into, I look at, he used to kid me a little bit about this. Every time I'd be referred to in the White House by the press. They refer to me as the White House optimist, like I was, as my grandfather Ambrose Finning would say, like I fell off the turnip truck yesterday, like I was the new kid. But I'm there longer than all of them. I'm optimistic because I know when given a chance, American people have never failed, never. And so one of the things that we talked about was, you know, all the problem that the infrastructure generates and faces, including cybersecurity and the threats national security threats to our system. It presents an enormous opportunity. Imagine if we made the investment in modernizing the gas pipeline to eliminate methane leaks, to increase efficiency, et cetera. We'd create tens of thousands of good-paying jobs, middle-class jobs, jobs you can raise a family on, jobs you get paid a prevailing wage. And there's so many opportunities in terms of jobs, and what we did with 48C, for example. We came along and we had a tax incentive to get manufacturers to manufacture windmills here in the United States, to manufacture solar panels here in the United States, generating real employment. Now, it didn't get renewed. We couldn't get the other team to renew it. But talk to me, Ernie, about how you look at it through the prism of not just what we can do in terms of securing the environment and our security, but are there other, what are some of the benefits that can flow in terms of the economy?
Well, I think let me mention two very different kinds of benefits. One is that if we go back to the "we're not going back" theme, that is a reminder that there was going to be a multi-trillion-dollar global clean energy economy, and we want to do the innovation that lets us not just meet our own needs, but frankly, help meet the world's needs with good jobs here and et cetera. But in general, we also, the shift in the energy economy is certainly creating more energy jobs. There's no question about that. And if I may advertise, tomorrow we'll be releasing another report on that. But a few points there is that we need to focus on people and skills for those jobs. Frankly, in the last report of this type, published just before we left office, said that 73% of the employers in the energy industry are having a difficult or very difficult time in filling their jobs.
That's right. That's what I wanted to get to.
Oh, yeah. And so, I think it's not exclusive, but I think a big part of that is the states, getting the states to align their energy programs, their economic development programs, and their training programs, bring them together in one way, create the community college opportunities, for example, work with the unions on apprenticeship programs. Frankly, start working on pre-apprenticeship programs for all those people who have been out of the job force for a while in underserved communities. Get them ready with the aptitude tests to come in there. So that way we serve our energy economy and we build the whole society from the bottom up.
You had me go out to PE&G out in California. Mm-hmm. And one of the things they're doing is internal apprenticeship programs, where they bring someone in who is working as a lineman, rather than when a job opens that is a job of requiring a higher skill and a little more education. They provide those who wish to continue to have opportunities. They provide ongoing apprenticeship programs while you are working as a lineman. Mm-hmm. So they're realizing it saves them millions and millions of dollars in terms of replacement workers. They're not having to go out and find new workers. And the one thing for you college students I'd urge you to think about, and this is pure Biden, nobody else. There is a creeping elitism that exists in our society, in my humble opinion. those of us with educations think that the person who shoveled coal into a blast furnace, or someone who is stringing a line for a utility company, is incapable of doing more, when in fact they are really capable of doing a great deal more. And it doesn't require 4 years of education or a graduate school. Much of it just requires a 15, 18-week training program, that learning everything from learning how to code to learning how to do a job and a function within the energy industry. That now, for example, remember when it didn't work out, but Dow Kokum had built that facility for solar shingles, and they couldn't find anybody up in the Northern Peninsula that knew how to run a photovoltaic machine? Mm-hmm. Well, you know, a lot of folks in my party and the other party thought, well, we got to go out and get a whole new group of folks and train them from scratch. When in truth, what happened was they went in and found a group of businesses, and we said, we're going to tie you up at the community college. And the community college, you tell us what skill you need to train on. Bring your machinery into the community college, into the workspace. Mm-hmm. Bring your employer, your employee, and we will pay for it, the community college, and train. And there was a 15-week program and set up a conveyor belt for $48,000 a year jobs. It is within the wheelhouse of the same people we grew up with who didn't get to go to college. It's within their wheelhouse. Those working class, high school educated people. They can do so much of this, and it can change now I'm being political with a small p. It can change the attitude of working class people about whether or not we forgot them, whether or not we really, in fact, care about them, the dislocation they feel. Because people out there, they're smarter than we think they are. I ran into a guy, I don't have permission to use his name, but I grew up with in Claymont, Delaware. I went to grade school and high school in Claymont, the Holy Rosary and Archmere Academy, and then I lived in Claymont only 4 of those years, but we moved not far from there in Brandywine 100. And I saw him at Christmas time, Ernie. And he came up to me and he grabbed me and said, "Hey, Joey, how you doing?" And I said, "Fine." I thought the Secret Service was going to shoot him. I said, "How you doing, Ernie?" He said, "Good." He said, I said, "You still driving?" He said, "Nah, Joey," he said, "only guys like you never worked in your life can continue to work." He said, "Guys like me," and he was an independent trucker, making between 80 and 120 grand a year, breaking his neck. And he earned every penny of it. He's retired. And I said, "How's his son, Tony?" He said, "He's in trouble." And I said, "Can I help him?" Just like you would do a friend. "Can I help?" He said, No, Joey." He said, "He just knows." He said, "He's still driving, still making a good living. He knows he can have no job in 3 to 5 years." They listen to the news. We're being told, whether it turns out to be true, that all the trucks are going to be automated. There'll be no drivers. We don't talk to those people. We're not preparing them. Mm-hmm. And there's so many opportunities in this field. So I'm going to let Ernie have the last word, and I'm going to stop talking, open to questions from any of you.
Just on this, first of all, you said that was only you, but I would like to align myself with the gentleman from Delaware in those comments. I think this is an area where we were actually in sync for the entire administration.
I didn't want to ruin your reputation.
I know, but at this point, what the hell, right? So, going back to a couple of more points to make maybe is, one is this issue, first of all, of the kind of like the pre-apprenticeship for those who are not in the job market for whatever reason, because we got to remember also, and I will toot your horn a little bit, let's face it, the run on job creation in this country has been going on, in contrast to some recent statements, not since 2017, but since 2010, unbroken. And that has led us to, among those in the job market, a very tight job market. And yet, in the energy industry, they want to hire 7, 8, 9% more workers,
Yep.
where are you going to get them? So that's why these programs are so critical, and not to mention and for the reasons you say, and for the reasons of doing that business. But the other thing I would say is, look, manufacturing is an enormous thing, and that's also important in the energy business. Just as one example of how we can leverage that even more, you take highly efficient pieces of equipment, Energy Star appliances.
Yep.
These are a global brand. 9% job growth in there. You got to find the people. They want another 9%. Where are you going to find them? Third point, manufacturing today is an IT job.
That's exactly
And that's
right.
the training that one needs. These are not old-fashioned manufacturing jobs.
There's 100,000 high-tech manufacturing jobs going unfilled as I speak
Right.
here today that require with no more than a 14 to 16-week program for the vast majority of them to be able to be filled.
Yeah. And one other, I'll add one more point, going back again to the administration, the Obama administration. For example, the Department of Energy. Well, actually, I'm going to say one thing. You may remember, we went together to the Hampton Roads area to dedicate a program
That's right.
funded by the Department of Energy Nuclear Weapons Program to train minority students in cybersecurity, because they said, where the hell are we going to, now I'm speaking like you, where the hell are we going to get, where the hell are we
Don't
going to
get
get,
yourself in
where
trouble.
the hell are we going to get the people for these jobs if we don't start training them now? But then a last example, anecdote, just one of them, there were many of these, but so one of our national laboratories, Oak Ridge, was the center for developing 3D manufacturing technologies. I personally drove, and I think you didn't, a 3D printed Colby Chevrolet.
No, I saw it. You sent me out there, but they didn't let me drive
That's right, I drove it, right. That was your security detail.
right.
Mine was more lax.
Well,
but
Pruitt
the point
wouldn't
is,
have been able to drive it either.
but the point there is that then at a community college right near Oak Ridge,
Yep.
we established a program to train in 3D printing. Number one, that program had an exceptional number of returning veterans. Number two, when you think about if we in the United States can train a lot of people in 3D printing, from the doing it to the inventing it, that whole spectrum, this is a game changer. This can be a complete supply chain game changer in many parts of our economy. That's what we got to be doing.
Well, folks, look,
Yeah.
I know you're all these forums I do here, you're always probably think I am too optimistic, but we are so incredibly well positioned. We have more, if you talk about the national laboratories, most of these national laboratories are universities. Most of these national laboratories were not the ones, not all of them, but what we're talking about here is Eisenhower's pretty damn brilliant. He decided after Sputnik, we're going to invest the vast majority of our research dollars, pure research, into universities. Almost everything that's changed, every game changer in the last 25 years has come out of one of these research universities. And so there's enormous, enormous, enormous opportunity.
I had to find one chance to object.
Okay.
Truman, not Eisenhower.
Yeah, well, actually, Truman did start. That's
started-
right. No,
he
no, no.
started it.
He started the land grant. But it was after Sputnik when he set up his commission,
Yeah, then-
Eisenhower, the quote,
absolutely.
20 wise men. He wouldn't say that today. He'd say wise women and men. But it was 20 wise men, and they recommended all the money be put into the equivalent of DARPA.
Yeah.
And he said, no, we're going to be engaging in great research universities. Well, look, let's open it up to questions. And I understand we have a microphone, although it's hard for me to see out there, so the microphones are at either end. So raise your hand. There you go. The house lights are up. I can see.
And students get priority.
Students get priority. And tell us tell us your name, and if you're at the university, what school you're in. Go ahead. You're right here.
First, I want to thank you for treating us to this important conversation. I'm Holly Michael. I'm an associate director with Denon and also faculty in geological sciences.
You look like a student, so it was a mistake.
Thanks. I was looking for a
Cut her
student,
off.
but
Cut her
I
off.
didn't see one.
Right.
So my research focuses on water resources, and I'd like to know what you see as the most important challenges at the nexus of water and energy for the coming decades, and also what opportunities do you see for interdisciplinary research to help address them?
I'll let you handle that.
When it-
You go ahead.
Well, look, I
I have
think,
a view, but not as...
by the way, first of
view.
all, I'd like to refer you to a wonderful Sankey diagram. Probably a lot of people don't know what that is. These are these flow diagrams that have inputs that flow to outputs. And I just want to advertise that at the department, we created, and Melanie Kinderdine's office right there can point you to it, the first time, I think, that it was a water energy joint Sankey diagram. So it shows you all the overlaps of energy and water. Two obvious areas, I think. One clearly is the enormously energy-intensive desalination challenges that we have and are going to have. But secondly, particularly our energy generation activities are tremendously water dependent. And as we frankly see the regrettably correct projections of things like drought with global warming, we are really going to have to relook a little bit at how that water supply is managed. There are, let's say for power plants, there are some alternatives like so-called dry cooling. The trouble is that kills you on efficiency. You lose efficiency in doing it, and therefore can have more emissions. So those are just some of the issues in the energy water nexus.
And a very practical thing, which surprised me, just being a history major here at Delaware, was that I didn't realize, so working with the mayors up in Detroit as well as in Washington, D.C., how many water pipes are made of wood out there now that are just leaking? You know, you all knew that. I didn't know that. I said, holy God, we have wooden water pipes that are in the major cities in America?
You know, a very different water issue, maybe just add, but it goes back to what you said earlier, Mr. Vice President. An infrastructure in the United States that is important to energy and to many, many other commodities that is in very bad shape are the inland waterways.
Yeah.
It's probably not a water issue in the sense of your research program, but it is quite important.
In our infrastructure legislation, which has been dropped, not energy infrastructure, but infrastructure overall, about 20% of all we proposed be spent was in inland waterways. The enormous amount of commerce, the enormous amount of traffic, the enormous amount of economic activity in the inland waterways it's astounding. And again, unless you're in the business, it's hard to realize how consequential it is and how antiquated our inland waterways are, dikes, our systems. We did some of that along the Mississippi, but we haven't done much.
You know, I'm going to add one more. I said, you have to move on to the next question, or I'll just keep answering. But this is completely different, a pretty big body of water, but I think it's one where, especially in the academic research community, need to turn a lot more attention to it, and that is the future of the ocean. We are making a mess of the ocean, and carbon dioxide is part of that. It isn't the only part. And so I think a really enormous program around the oceans is just called for.
I was with the Prime Minister of Canada. He pulled me aside. He wanted to talk about the Great Lakes and all the work we have to do and what a gigantic percentage of all the fresh water in the world are in those Great Lakes.
Yep.
And, anyway, questions? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, thank you for so much great conversation today. My name is Grace Pedersen. I am a student and a Denon ambassador. My question for you is, do you think that sustainability will ever be depoliticized?
reality has a way of intruding. No, I'm not being facetious. Reality has a way of intruding. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have the secretary here, wanted to do this here, and why I didn't keep it all at an academic level. Because I don't think people understand, I don't think they understand what's at stake. And I don't mean talking down to people, I mean well-informed, high school, college-educated, PhD, I don't think they fully understand what's at stake. And so the more we can demystify and talk in practical terms about what's at stake and what the opportunities are, the harder it is for the political parties to be the vessels of special interest, of not wanting certain things done. And so the answer is yes, I think we'll get to that point. The question is, in time, in a lot of time, or not so much time?
I would just add one other point. I think to get there is going to require our addressing economic inequality issues. It's very hard to have communities uniformly buying in when there is so much disparity in their conditions.
And that's why we call our system a federal system. A federal system. We make up for each other's weaknesses and liabilities. I remember there's a lot in the news about John McCain and me. John and I are really close personal friends. We've been close personal friends for a long time. We argue like hell with one another. I remember early on, I was trying to get money for transit in the Northeast. And John stood on the floor with some Midwestern Democrats as well and argued that why should the Midwest and why should Arizona be paying to accommodate somebody being able to get to work in Philadelphia or New York? Why should they do that? And I stood up on the floor and I said, I amend my amendment. I will withdraw any request for transportation help in the Northeast in terms of rail if we eliminate all funding for water projects. And he looked at me and I said, because he said, why should my mother in Phoenix pay for someone in Philadelphia to be able to get to work, to subsidize it? I said, why would my mother pay for your mother to be able to drink water? No. It's something we forget. We don't teach civics anymore in America. The system was designed to compensate. And so were it not for the Hoover Dam, were it not for multi-million-dollar, now billion-dollar projects, there would still be an arid desert in Arizona and much of the parts of Southern California. And so that's what we're about. It's about growing America. Growing America. Anyway, yes, ma'am.
Thank you, God. Seriously. Vice President, thank you very much. Secretary, thank you. I always told you I liked your hair.
I thought I was going to escape once without that, but anyway, all right.
I thank God because of the fact that I'm standing for the children who are not able to even finish high school, let alone get to community college or college. And Vice President, we want to thank you for Executive Order 13650 on improving chemical security, facility, and safety under the Obama administration. 2 Delawareans were part of that, you and me. I'm on the other side with the environmental justice community. We wrote a demographic analysis on the state of Delaware, and we are working with the folks who are on the other side of the middle class, who are grappling with what an energy democracy looks like for them on an affordability side based on legacy situations like our brothers and sisters in the Taos Pueblo of New Mexico through to the Gulf Coast, on over into Appalachia, and on down into Sussex County. We're working together as a collective, and we would like to work with the Biden Institute to fulfill the piece of that of true economic environmental justice from a principled bottom-up perspective, to which we know that you and President Barack Obama were always committed to, and we thank you for. And one of your star folks, Dr. Cecilia Martinez, alum of this fine institution and one of the White House Champion of Change, is one of our leaders in working with us on this. So we ask, can we meet with you, sit down, and figure out, because if we take care of the least of these, like you say, we take care of all of us, and even more so our beloved Mother Earth. Thank you, God.
You
And
didn't think I
thank you,
could
Vice
do this?
President.
The answer is yes.
Can I inject one
Sure, yeah.
comment which is spurred by that?
I
It's
want it
quite-
clear. I gave a one-word answer.
From me or from you?
No, me. Not,
Oh, I
I'm making sure. I've never done that. I just.
It just was spurred by that, as you know, it's quite different. But going back to the issue of getting to this low-carbon future, and something about nonpartisanship, I certainly believe, I think as many do, that ultimately the policy we really need is one that puts a price on carbon emissions, CO2 emissions across the economy. And here, while it may not be exactly the right answer, I would put forward the merits of what is sometimes called the Republican proposal. George Shultz,
Yep.
Jim Baker, Hank Paulson, et cetera, where there are three stools. One stool is to put the tax on, or the charge, if you want to use a better word. $45 a ton, they propose, which is like the social cost of carbon. A second stool is, a leg of the stool, is to eliminate other tax incentives and some regulations. But the third leg of the stool, which is what was sparked by this, is that return the funds to the American people in equal installments so that it is progressive. 70% of the lowest part of the income distribution comes out ahead in that. So I think that's what we need to do so we simultaneously accomplish our climate goals while at least helping on the issue of a more progressive society.
I think it's inevitable.
And it's
We're gonna
Republicans
have
who
to-
proposed it. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Hi, thank you. My name is Bill Schafferman. I'm the director of the Institute of Energy Conversion, IEC, and also a Denon affiliate. And I'd like to just acknowledge that then freshman Senator Biden helped play a critical role in the founding of IEC back in 1972.
I didn't say I was found, but I was telling the secretary about 72 when we were having lunch together.
There you go. So my question about jobs and innovation is, using solar energy as the example, there can be perceived a conflict between developing new technology and new innovation when the manufacturing jobs are likely to end up overseas, in Asia in this case. So the question is, how do we get beyond this mindset of specifically linking research and policy priorities to manufacturing jobs in a case where there's much broader impacts? And then more specifically, do you envision pathways that we can help bring that manufacturing back to the United States?
I think we can, and we started to do that. Look, under GATT, under the WTO, we are able to engage in certain incentives that do not violate international trade agreements. And we have been reluctant to do that. And quite frankly, some in our administration were reluctant to do that on the grounds that the end result was, if in fact it can be manufactured at a ridiculously low price with ridiculously low labor, if it saves the consumer here in the United States, so be it, it's a better thing to do. I disagree with that notion. For example, one example is 48C. It actually generated the manufacture of and the growth of expertise. One of the things I worry about is that when we do not provide the incentive to, within the international trade agreements we have now, to manufacture here in the United States what we invent here in the United States, we also eat some of our own seed corn. We lose a bit of the initiative in the process. So I don't think it's hard, but it's far from impossible. And I also think there is a larger social good for it. I think that when you're competing internationally and the use of the manufacturing technique is one that is environmentally unsound in the country in which it is taking place, it's not good for us, it's not good for that country, it's not good for the environment overall. And I don't think you should be able to benefit economically for damaging the environment, where if you manufactured it here, you'd have to have a containment vessel or whatever it may be. So I think there are ways to do that, number one. Number two, I think that there is I think it gets down to, as well, making sure that we invest in the kind of capacity that allows people to perform those functions. And we don't do that very well anymore in the United States. And I'm going to vastly oversimplify in the interest of time. You know, when guys, the baby boomers like me, when we were coming up, although I have to admit I never took it, there was shop in our public school systems. People learned whether or not they had any dexterity, any interest. They found out that they actually liked working with their hands and they could actually make a living. Well, it's essentially a non-existent class anymore. There's some schools that are doing it, bringing it back a little bit. Secondly, I don't know why one of our sciences that you can't qualify for a science credit for high school isn't coding. It's like, it seems to me, it's like I can't, but it seems to me it's as much as learning how 180 years ago when I was in high school, you had to take typing, to learn to type. It's a ridiculous comparison, but it's not that far off. And so there's a lot of things I think we have to do with our education system as well to provide us the ability to provide the workforce. But there's incentives, you can incentivize corporations to stay here without going beyond the fair trade agreements we have and not violating them like other countries do.
Maybe I'll just add a couple things. One is, as the Vice President said, first of all, there's no doubt that manufacturing has at least had some recovery in the United States. There are many factors in that, but one of them relevant to the energy discussion that has not been mentioned and often generates controversy among people who should be working together to solve problems, and that is the natural gas revolution. Natural gas revolution has led to $200 billion of investment in new capacity just in the Gulf Coast region, let alone other parts of the country. So, actually, President Obama made a, in my view, brilliant statement on that on the White House South Lawn in the, I think it was October 2016 climate dialogue with DiCaprio and Katharine Hayhoe, when he said, fundamentally, look, we've got issues here. We've got environmental issues we got to worry about in fracking, minimize the footprint. But let's also remember it has both reduced carbon emissions and been an enormous economic boom and created huge manufacturing jobs. And we just got to be practical and work together and solve problems rather than take these kinds of extreme
Any one of these questions we could spend the rest of the night on, but one of the things I want to mention is this. My responsibility for the administration was basically dealing with Russia and Central and Eastern Europe and the pressure coming from Russia in using their energy as a weapon, as a means by which to change behaviors. They have used a different tool. It's not just tanks rolling across the border, it is cutting off gas supplies and and whether it's Romania or Bulgaria, it's a long story. But at any rate, this natural gas is a gigantic foreign policy tool that we have available to us. And one of the reasons why, I'm going to say very bluntly, I was able to get Poroshenko and Ukrainians to be able to stand up to the Russians in one of the recent recent 14 months, 15 months. So the point is that there's multiple facets to this. It impacts on our ability to enhance our security, not just economically, but politically, because enormous pressure is being placed on the European countries, and a new economic bludgeon is being used by Russia, which only has energy, and to change structures, governmental structures in Europe. Matter of fact, I'm going over to Copenhagen with Rasmussen, who headed up NATO. I wrote a thing for foreign policy, a lead article for foreign policy suggesting there should be a 9/11 type commission investigating Russian interference in European elections. It's rife, it's consequential. Look what's happening in Poland, look what's happening in Romania, look what's happening in Hungary, look what's I mean, it's gigantic. And so I'm going over, and we've named 5 heads of state over there to set up a commission to be able to do this. But my point is, it's part of the arsenal to combat what is being used as a blunt instrument by Russia in Europe today. Imagine if it had a common energy policy in Europe, how fundamentally different things would be for our security.
Maybe I'm going to go back to the manufacturing, but I want to add a little bit of one thing on this, which is, I think, interesting. So the Ukraine incursion by Russia, and there were 2 cutoffs of gas to Ukraine by Russia, occurred early in 2014. By 2016, Ukraine no longer had any direct gas imports from Russia, because also after 2014, the United States, President Obama, Vice President Biden, initiated an energy security initiative with the G7, and that led to a new set of energy security principles that was adopted. It led to the Europeans greatly increasing their internal natural gas distribution infrastructure. They enforced the idea that Russia could not specify the destination of their gas. So Ukraine was getting all their gas. A lot of it was probably Russian gas, but coming back through connectors
Bulgaria,
in other countries. So it's a huge deal, and the United States now emerging as a very large natural gas LNG exporter is not using gas as a weapon, just changing the global market into one that is much more fluid, where nobody has that kind of leverage to
Look what we're doing in the Caribbean.
Yeah.
Look what's beginning to happen in terms of Venezuela. I mean,
Yeah.
so it says ramifications well beyond the direct economic impact. That's all. The only
Okay, but I want to go back to now the manufacturing. One more comment to make in terms of the original question. Although we always enjoy having a riff, we're here on whatever we feel like. Is that we do have to remember, I think, that it is a reality, and probably a good one, that it's not as though manufactured products are like all made in one country.
That's right.
We have very complex supply chains. Certainly in North America, if it isn't screwed up, we have very, very integrated supply chains that are very important. And what we want to do in the United States is, we want to use our innovation edge, et cetera, to have that reflected in the high value added manufacturing activities. Right. We don't need to manufacture the, complete array of low value added products. Still remembering, and let's go back to that earlier riff on like 3D printing. Let me add to it materials by design, et cetera, all these things that we can do. But we can also reshape those supply chains.
That's right.
By getting these new technologies. But we need the training.
Now look, I know we're running out of time. Here's what I'd like to do. Let's have the next, if there's 2, 3, 4 people, each of you ask your question and we'll respond after we hear from all of you, okay? So there's a woman right in the middle in maroon, and then the young man right here. Oh, you got a young man there? I didn't see him.
So,
How could I miss you?
I'm Nathan Merrill. I attend Smyrna Middle School, and my question is, what role does nuclear energy play in the coming energy revolution, as we have this problem in that solar energy dips off the grid at the time where we have the peak energy consumption. So we need something that's carbon neutral to cover that. And nuclear energy does not produce any carbon, but it does produce this waste product that is highly toxic for tens of thousands of years. And 40 years on and into this, we still have no efficient and good way to take care of this stuff and make sure that nobody has any radiation poisoning or any good way to dispose of it.
Did you say middle school?
Yes.
I feel like I'm watching that program my wife, the professor, loves to watch 2 nights ago. Those, what's it called? The Kid Geniuses. They get up and. By the way,
If that were the case, he'd answer the question, not.
well, the mere fact you can ask the question is impressive. Please go ahead. Oh,
Hi,
Whoever has a.
my name's Benjamin Personvek. I recently graduated from Delaware Technical Community College's Solar Energy Program. And my question is, thank you. In this job search, I've noticed throughout the country, mainly anywhere except California, there are few and far between solar contractors. So finding a job has been a little bit difficult. But California recently passed legislation requiring solar energy on all new homes starting in 2020. Do you feel like it would be more feasible for a government agency to step in and take control of how these projects get built, or to leave it up to local contractors as far as the benefits to economic growth?
Okay.
This will be one to kind of wrap it all up. My name is Cynthia Robinson. I'm the pastor at the New Ark United Church of Christ.
I didn't do it, Pastor. I swear to God, I didn't do it.
I believe you, Joe.
As we say in my faith, bless me, Father, for I have sinned. Go ahead.
We're on the Upper East Side of New Ark on Main Street.
I know you, Lloyd Wells. Anyway, go ahead.
Okay. Well, Gus Speth, who is an environmental lawyer and an advocate, he said he thought that biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change were our biggest problems. And this was about 30 years ago. He said if we took 30 years of good science and threw that at those problems, we could solve them. But what he discovered was that our 3 biggest environmental challenges are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And that what we really need is a cultural and spiritual transformation, and that scientists don't know how to do that. So what I'm asking is, I know in my congregation and in the United Church of Christ, we do what we can to encourage that spiritual and cultural transformation to work on those problems of selfishness, greed, and apathy. But where have you witnessed, either of you, both of you witnessed that cultural, spiritual transformation, and where do you think it's coming from now?
Well, I think it's being generated. Okay. Was there any more questions that we're going to do? This young man right here, he's probably going to ask me something about Einstein.
Hi, my name's Tim Merrill. I go to Smyrna Intermediate School, JBM, and thanks for taking my question. And
You're welcome.
I was wondering if, to follow up my brother's question, we could.
Okay. I don't think your parents are going to have to pay for tuition, but keep going.
I was
those are the
wondering
parents
if
between them.
I was wondering what the plan was for breeder reactors in their use, because they can bring back energy into depleted uranium from that toxic waste. The only problem is they also make 2 other products, including polonium and heavy water. So this in itself has a few byproducts, but it's much better than that of depleted radioactive slop. So all in all, I think it would be wise to be using it, but are there any plans for us to use it?
It's been nice being with you all.
Do you want to start?
If he can't answer it, I sure in heck can't. Go ahead.
Okay, okay. I'll start with the first. I'll start with the brothers.
Yes.
The nuclear.
Start with Smyrna and the parents smiling
The,
because
the
Dr.
nuclear.
Asanis is trying to sign them both up right now to come to Delaware.
That's easy, Dennis. Give them scholarships. No problem. No. So look. First of all, the question about nuclear power, and then we'll get to the breeder part. Our view, and it was our view in the administration, that we termed ourselves the all of the above approach, meaning that we should be developing all of the possible sources that could be part of a low-carbon future. That certainly includes renewables, it certainly includes nuclear, and it includes fossil fuel combustion if you then can capture the carbon and somehow dispose of it, okay? So we believe that. We don't believe that everybody will use all those tools. But the idea is different countries and different regions of our country will choose different mixes. In that context, it's very important that we continue to work to make nuclear power an available tool for low-carbon solutions. Now, where do we stand? In some parts of the world, like China would be the leader, is building enormous amounts of nuclear power. And they have special forms of financing that may help that work. In the United States, I will say flat out that we are building two power plants in two nuclear reactors in Georgia, new ones to come online in 2021, 2022. Huge cost overruns. To be perfectly blunt, I would be very surprised if we see any of those very large 1,000-megawatt plus plants being built. But there's hope. The hope is that a new direction called small modular reactors, rather than getting bigger and bigger, get smaller, 50 megawatts, 100 megawatts. The first of those just passed a major licensing milestone last week at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. If all goes well, we will see a bunch of those deployed in about 2026. If that works, there's tremendous interest in this technology, both domestically and globally. They've got to prove their cost equation still to come. But it's an example of innovation that I think could be very important. Now, you both raised in some way or another waste, nuclear waste. I'm going to disappoint the younger brother by saying that at least for a long time, I do not see the merit of going to breeder reactors. So breeder reactors, the idea is they would be essentially a plutonium reactor that produces more plutonium than they require for fuel. We have long been concerned about the nuclear proliferation risks in going down that pathway. The original motivation for that was because, like so many things back in the 60s, we're running out of uranium. The technical term is we have uranium coming out of our ears. It is cheap and abundant, and it is much less expensive to operate on uranium, on natural uranium, enriched new uranium, than trying to recycle all of this stuff. So I think for a long, long time, that will be the preferred path forward. There are also ideas for disposing of it. I could go into that, but I think take too much time.
Why don't you respond to the young man who
The
graduated?
solar jobs and the California issue. I think first of all, the issue you raised, or that is raised by California's new directive, it's certainly interesting, but it's got challenges that I have not seen resolved yet. Part of it is the older brother, I don't know if he knew it, but he was mentioning the duck curve. You do know the duck curve, right?
If you're from Delaware, you think of Duck Creek, but that's
right.
a different.
Or the blue duck.
Well, actually,
right,
there's
right.
a creek not
Right.
far from where he lives called Duck Creek.
So those are not familiar. The duck curve is something that is being manifest in Hawaii, in California, in Arizona, Massachusetts, in which the deployment of solar producing all of its energy at the same time, like in the middle of the afternoon, is creating, in some places, some havoc with the rest of the system. And so what I think needs to be done is to incentivize, we're at a point, at least in many locations, where we have to incentivize solar, because solar by itself, by the way, has come incredibly inexpensive, right? When you only look at the kilowatt hours.
Yep.
But solar plus storage now becomes a different issue. And so many states are looking to evolve their incentives for rooftop solar to say, okay, we've done that. Now we incentivize rooftop solar plus storage to eliminate some of these problems. Whether or not you mentioned there should be different contractors and the like, I think the answer is yes, but we need to find a system more like what Germany has, for example, whereby all of their states follow the same codes. And that had, I haven't checked recently, but a few years ago, Germany is not exactly a low-cost place for labor. Their installation costs for rooftop solar were 40% of the United States. And a lot of it was because they had a uniformity of codes, and you didn't have to go through all kinds of licensing, acrobatics and the like. So I think that's the direction to go.
Does that answer your question? Yes. Okay. Now, Reverend, Pastor, again, I start off with the assumption, excuse me for being so personal, that people are basically good. I know not everybody starts that place. I'm not being facetious. And I think that what constitutes selfish is measured by whether or not what is being sought to the knowledge of the person seeking it is unfair somehow. I think a lot of what we've been doing so far relative to the environment, the average American, has not been viewed as selfish. They've just not seen the consequence of their action or what they supported. And so you have everything from now you show up in a motel somewhere and they tell you, please replace the towel, use it again, save energy, and people are doing it. Whereas no one thought of that 30 years ago. It wasn't thought that I'm being selfish by consuming water, consuming the energy to wash the towels. I'm being very pedantic here, I realize. So I think part of it is, again, the continuing education of of a generation that is coming up that's much more knowledgeable than we were. I don't know whether I'm going to make a strange analogy. You ever get in a car with your grandchildren, before they're fully seated, the safety belt is clicked. For me, I wait till the buzzer goes off. I'm being a little facetious, but not really. it's conditioning. And so a lot of what has been extremely wasteful behavior on the part of the American people, all people, has been they're not really aware of just how wasteful it is and what the consequences, the cumulative consequences. There are interests, special interests, good and bad, not all special interests are bad, that have been unwilling to make the kind of changes that would enhance the environment because it will cost more, either in action on their part or in dollars. It requires some action that they wouldn't otherwise have to take, or some outlay that up to now hasn't been required. That is selfish. But again, and I'm not making excuses, because you know I've been very, very outspoken on environmental issues my whole career. And for the first 3 terms I ran here, it was the thing that almost defeated me each time I ran because of corporate interest in the state. But I think it's, again, more when people realize the depth of the consequence of their failure to take the action that is being prevented by them now. When they realize that, there's a tendency to see if they can work out some way to ameliorate the cost to them and share the cost. For example, I'm going to give you a ridiculous example, drug prices. Well, you know, some drug companies it's like digging for oil, drilling for oil. They spend tens of millions of dollars and they come up dry. They come up dry on a product that they spent all this money, they don't find anything. Or the way in which I've been deeply involved in the cancer space, why there's very little effort on the part of drug companies to find drugs or any kind of treatment for childhood cancers, rare cancers, because they can't sell enough of the product if they invent it to make it worthwhile. They just lose a lot of money. And that's where, this is the third point, that's where we all come in. I think we have a collective moral obligation, for example, to make sure that society spends the money to find the cures for childhood cancers, those who have cancer, or environmental problems that are being visited upon only one community or only one industry, that are exorbitant from their perspective, but collectively it's in the national interest, and we make a debate, we make a call for it. The last point I'll make is that one of the things that has been few of our confessional faiths have spent much time on over the past 40 years that I've been involved has been the environment. It has been viewed as important, but sort of a stepchild in terms of a moral imperative of what we deal with. You're seeing a sea change. I remember the first time I had a major debate on the environment was in the Unitarian Church up on the Concord Pike, and it was one of the first churches that was making a big deal out of environmental responsibility. But we've come not full circle, we've progressed a great deal. I don't know if you saw the special on Pope Francis that's just come out. Pope Francis said it's the moral issue of our time, that the way in which we have treated the environment is the most consequential sin we have as a people committed. Now that comes from, I happen to be a practicing Catholic, that comes from a faith that not 10 years ago, it was only about choice and right to life. So there is an awakening, I think, across most of the confessional faiths, that this does have a profound moral dimension. And it has a profound moral dimension based upon income and based upon your place in society. And I'll be as simple as, I'll close with an example that is old. I remember one of the things I thought that I had signed on to the second editions of Profiles in Courage back in 1974, and I didn't want to. I was put on a committee called the Public Works Committee. And a guy named Jennings Randolph from West Virginia, who was elected in 1932 with Franklin Roosevelt, was the chairman of the committee. And I proposed, because I ran on an environmental platform, to rename the committee the Environment Committee. And he was outraged that I did that as a 30-year-old kid on his committee. So he decided to give me a, quote, subcommittee, which freshmen back in those days never got. It means you get a subcommittee, you get staff, you get to hold hearings, you get to write legislation. It's a big deal. And I was just overjoyed. I thought, God, what a nice thing for him to do. And he was obviously much smarter than I was. But it was a subcommittee with no legislative authority, but I was to focus on one thing: whether or not we should phase out lead in gasoline or trap lead in gasoline. So they had these, I didn't realize at the time, the DuPont company, then the largest employer in the state of Delaware, had spent hundreds of millions or tens of millions of dollars on developing what are called a lead trap. So when you brought an automobile with lead and gasoline, because it was all gasoline had lead in it at the time, what would happen is this filter, in effect, would catch the lead from going out the exhaust pipe. And if I had written a report that said you had to phase out, that the tailpipe was the determining factor, then it would have been hundreds of millions of dollars for the DuPont company. They had the patent. And it wasn't until I realized, as I was writing the report, this old son of a gun, he put me in a horrible position. The junior senator from Delaware is about to write a report, said no lead in gasoline, which would have cost, and it did cost the DuPont company retrospectively, tens of millions of dollars. They had the patent on these lead, these filters that would catch the lead. Whereas I had written the report he supported, which said you can continue to have lead in gasoline, but you have to make sure it doesn't come out the tailpipe. And a good friend of mine, Gil Sloan, is here as a chemist and understands this better than I do. Then, in fact, it would have been a bonanza. And by the way, the DuPont company's doing a good thing. It wasn't a bad thing. It wasn't a bad thing. It was a good thing. My generic point is that we reach points as we deal with the environment where ultimately you're going to have to make some really tough decisions that affect entire communities. And one of the reasons why I was the only guy in our administration who could go into coal country and not get shot, even though I think we should be phasing out coal or dealing with coal gasification, is because I go in and talk about, and this is maybe not what you're looking for, but I think an important point to end on, and that is that I wasn't worried merely about the environmental ecosystem. I was worried about the cultural ecosystem. What people don't understand is, if you're raised in Scranton, Pennsylvania, like I was, when coal was dying, or you're raised in West Virginia or Southeast Ohio, it's a culture. You not only go down in a mine, you worship at the same church. You marry in the same place. You listen to the same music. You are culturally, there's a cultural affinity that's deep, it's rooted, it matters. And so when we say to people, no, we'll find you another job, get out of the coal mines, in addition to the fact it pays well, they work like hell, we're being incredibly insensitive to the fact what it means to them. It's uprooting an entire culture that's existed for well over 100 years. It's like when we went down in the Gulf. Remember the Gulf oil spill and that whole deal? Well, I got asked to go down and speak in the Gulf. and it was about the closing of a shrimp manufacturing facility. I mean, a canning facility. And the president had gone down 2 weeks earlier and did a good job, but he sat out, and I remember I think it was called Claude's Fish House or something, on a bayou, and tried to demonstrate that you could still eat what came out of the Gulf, etc. And he got panned when he got home. I went down, and I went to Bayou Lafourche and did the same thing on a dock with about 50 shrimpers and their boats, and a couple hundred people, more press than people, talking about what was going on in the Gulf. And I got this overwhelming credit. Why couldn't the president be more like Biden? Well, it was unfair to the president and overly generous to me, because standing behind me were the folks who, for literally several generations, their parents had had shrimp boats, their father, their grandfather, their great-grandfather. Again, any of you from Louisiana down that way, the bayou culture is a different culture. It's a good culture. It's a different culture. Everybody does. They dance, they listen to the same music, they go to the same churches. It's a culture. And so when the press conference was over, I was standing at the podium, and there was a big old boy standing behind me. He was about 6'6", 6'7", 270, and he owned a shrimp boat that it was docked. And when I turned to thank them, he reached his arms around me and hugged me and started crying. And the press could see him crying when he was holding me. This is a big man. You know what he's crying about? He was crying about that one of his friends, Louis, remember the name, had committed suicide because his way of life was over. He'd never come back. And he was crying, saying, "Can you get me help? Can you get us some psychiatry? You know, those guys that come down and talk to us. Can you help us? Can you help us?" So I spent my time talking about not just the environmental eco-culture that was damaged down there, but the culture that was damaged. And presumptuous of me to say this, but you're an incredibly well-educated audience. I think we have to be more sensitive to the culture, because some places, as Ernie pointed out, are much more impacted upon. Much more impacted. Not just because of the industry they've worked in, but because of the geography they live in. But we don't spend a lot of time. Conclude, my dad used to have an expression. He said, "Joey, I don't expect the government to solve my problem, but Joey, I expect them to understand it." You know how it is if you have a problem, not a joke. If you're like most people, the mere fact that the person you're talking to acknowledges it, says, "I understand it. I can't fix it. I don't know how, but I understand it." It makes a difference. That's what we call community. That's what we talk about, in my view. That's what I mean by America First. We've always done better. Always, always. We've recognized the pain as well as the opportunity of fellow Americans. But so many people feel left out. So many people. And not just black folk, not just Hispanic, high school educated white folk. They feel left out. And it's not healthy. But you're a wonderful audience. Thanks for coming. I appreciate it. It's great to be here.